Well, I'm in Glastonbury at the site of the Holy Thorn. Previous ones have been vandalised. Long may this one survive. So why is the Glastonbury Thorn so important? Well, according to legend, which may or may not be true, it was planted by Joseph of Arimathea when he came with the boy Jesus during the so-called missing years. Jesus would have been beginning his travels around the world at that time, learning from the yogis, and the arch-druids, and the Taoists, and the like, gaining his knowledge and abilities. Joseph of Arimathea was a metal merchant, so it's quite normal to believe that he was here visiting the tin mines of southwest Britain. According to the legend, they arrived by boat. Now, don't forget the Somerset levels were still flooded at that time. They weren't drained until the Middle Ages. And Wiriel Hill and Glastonbury Tor would have been dry land standing up above the marshes. Indeed, you can see the Tor in the background in this shot. Apparently, the first thing Joseph did was thrust his staff into the ground, possibly to give him some leverage to get out of the boat. And he left it there, and it took root and grew. There's some evidence to support this in the fact that this is a subspecies of hawthorn, Crataegus monogyna biflora, is a small deciduous tree which blooms twice a year, once during the winter and once at the normal time of the hawthorn flowering in the spring, around about May time. And of course, the superstitious would have thought that its flowering in the winter had something to do with the birth of Jesus, which they believed was during the winter. It probably wasn't, but... So, did these feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountain green? And was the Holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures green? And did that countenance divine shine forth on our clouded hills? As William Blake suggested in his famous poem. Well, of course, there was no England at that time, but Britain was certainly here. And the clouds were probably the mists rising up from the levels. But yes, he may very well have walked in ancient Britain. I think the legend may have much truth to it. What do you think? But what is certainly not true is the claim that Christianity was brought to Britain at that time. Jesus was just a boy, and Christianity wasn't invented until several years after his death. And anyway, Jesus wasn't a Christian. He was a Nazarene, possibly the leader of the Nazarenes, a subgroup or denomination of the Essenes. Around, 33, 36 CE, historians can't seem to make their mind up. But anyway, a couple of years after the crucifixion, a dubious character called Saul of Tarsus, later called St. Paul, infiltrated the Nazarenes and wormed his way into their leadership. Now, I don't mean to offend anybody's religious beliefs, but this is how I see the history the actual history, taking it out of the religious context. At that time, the Nazarenes, also known as the Church of Jesus and James, were headquartered at Damascus. How Saul took over, we can only speculate, but he claimed to have been blinded on the road to Damascus by a light from heaven sent by Jesus. So, are we really supposed to believe that Jesus has spent his whole life healing people, including blind people, would have deliberately blinded somebody? I find that very hard to swallow. But maybe that's just me. So who was this character Saul anyway? Apparently he was some kind of Roman treasury agent. So did he really have some kind of an epiphany on the road to Damascus? Or was it an elaborate Roman plot to take over the Nazarenes, which they clearly saw as a dangerous sect? We can only speculate. But we have to ask why Saul, who was now calling himself Paul, relocated the group to Rome, right in the heart of their enemies. It would have been like the French resistance relocating to Berlin during the Second World War. It would have been completely unthinkable. It's known that Emperor Tiberius had great respect for Jesus after he learned of the resurrection. Now, this is just my personal view, but I think someone in the Senate wanted the Nazarenes where he could see them, where he could keep a close eye on them. Or perhaps that's not true. Perhaps Tiberius really did have a soft spot for them, and it was he that wanted them close. We can only guess. But we do know how it all worked out, don't we? Fast forward 400 years to a time when the Roman economy had tanked, and they were no longer able to maintain their troops in the far-flung corners of the empire. The Christian church played a very useful role then, collecting taxes and sending them to Rome. So I believe you have to make up your own mind on all this stuff. What do you think?